Hi everyone, welcome to Ethex Cuppa Club. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Tan, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Greater Change Community Interest Company, and they're a fantastic organisation working to tackle homelessness. I'll be hearing a bit more from John about them in the course of this webinar. Just before we get started, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name's Josh Brewer. I'm the Senior Business Development Manager at Ethex. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. So I think it's important to say that the aim of this session is to really understand a bit more about Greater Change, their business model, how they deliver their impact. It's not a financial promotion. It's just important to say that we can't talk about any individual's personal circumstances either. So we have a chat function. We'd really welcome any questions coming from any of the people watching today. So if you have got a question, just post it into the chat. I'll try and work it into our conversation with John, or if there isn't time during the session, then at the end we'll come and pick up any questions that are still there. We are recording this session and we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel and also website, so you'll be able to watch it again or share it with anyone. And we'll also be sending a follow-up email with any links to any organisations or documents or resources that we might discuss. The session should be no longer than 45 minutes, but yeah, we're just really looking forward to understanding a bit more about Greater Change. So just, John, great to have you here today.
Hi Josh, yeah, great to be here.
Great. So I think, John, you've got a couple of slides you're just going to run through to start off, just to give a really high-level overview of the organisation. But before we get into that, can I just ask you maybe a more personal question? And why homelessness? Why was this the issue that you felt you wanted to get involved in?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think a lot of the motivation for myself and my co-founder Alex came from the fact that we were volunteering at Aspire Oxford, our first still existing partner charity. And you know, we saw how many people got stuck in place and was literally trapped in homelessness, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. But really, that sort of motivated us to say there's a very clear gap that if it were plugged, you know, could really help quite a lot of people move on permanently out of homelessness. And I think, you know, personally for myself as well, my parents experienced childhood poverty when they were younger. You know, I was very lucky to have been protected from it. But you know, was the first person in my immediate family really to go properly to university. And I think, you know, it's just really a really sobering thought to think that, you know, there are a lot of very close possible worlds where we wouldn't have been so lucky. So, you know, yeah, just really motivated to want to help people sort of take a couple of those big steps out of homelessness and give them a fighting chance. So, yeah.
Great. I mean, I think there's a really nice a point in the offer document. You say, you know, I think in 100 years we'll look back and say, how on earth did we have people, you know, live homeless, you know, and be astonished by that. And I think that's great that you're doing things to try and move us to that position. Yeah. So if you want to just start running through some of just an overview of Greater Change, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me share my screen here. Okay, can you see that? Can you see this?
Yes, I can see that fine.
Yeah, okay. Let me just get onto the screen. Sorry, there's now blocking. Great. So, as Josh was saying, you know, I think this is a problem that I think we have all sort of understood is a growing issue, and is increasingly something that, you know, is on people's minds. It can seem like an insurmountable problem at times, you know, having over 150 to 200,000 people experiencing homelessness in the UK today. And what we wanted to do to sort of help us feel like we can impact this issue was to look at really how can we help the individual, and from there, you know, achieve the scale that we need to make a dent on the bigger statistics and the bigger numbers. So the problem as we saw it was that if you were homeless and you were working your way out of homelessness, you were engaging well with your support worker, one of the things that you will still inevitably come up against is some sort of financial barrier on your path out. So that might, for example, be, rent deposit and first month's rent. You might be able to afford the monthly rent payments in the future with your universal credit or other sources of work income. But what you're unable to do is save up for that. In Oxford, Josh, you probably know, 600 to 1,200 pounds for first month's rent and rent deposit. And that's just an impossible sum really to come up with by yourself. So what we wanted to do is provide that catalyst funding and help people move out of that overcome that barrier that they're in. And the way we wanted to do that was to create an alternative giving platform that is effective and empathy based, so that we can really help, capture that moment of empathy that you feel when you walk past someone who's homeless on the street. You really want to help them. This is a constructive way to do it. And we really wanted to, make sure that it's all about empathy and nuance and education. So what we have been able to do so far with our platform, very happy to say, is that we recently passed the milestone of helping over 380 people take large steps out of homelessness. And we take that evidencing and impacting really seriously, mostly because Alex and myself, we're huge stats nerds. And so, over 70% of the people that we've supported have been able to move into stable housing and sustain it 12 months on. And we know this because of the impacting work we've done. We also know that, over 40% of them make it into gainful employment. We know that of the 76 ex-offenders that we worked with last year in the fiscal year 2020 and 2021, only one person re-offended in that time. So these are all just, bits of impact that we're really, really proud of. And more than the obvious, immediate direct impact it has on the client, what we also know is that there are huge systems impact as well. And that's sort of what you see on the slide there, the cost savings for local and central government. To say that when you move someone out of temporary emergency accommodation, that's one more bed space that's freed up to help someone else who's on the street. Right, that's long-term health needs that are reduced, because there are really, really good studies that show that unsurprisingly, if you are homeless for a long period of time, that has an impact on your health in the long run. It's, again, as I was saying earlier, a reduction in recidivism amongst people who have had interactions with the criminal justice system. All of that has a huge impact on costs to local and central government. So we know that we have a huge social return on impact on our work. So how does this entire system work all together? So we know about impact, we know about the theory of change, okay, our theory of change. So how does it all come together? Well, so we essentially run a couple of donation channels that are tech-based and what we think is empathy-based. And in fact, what it does is allows people to effectively give directly to individuals that they want to support. And we then, take that funding and release it in a really, really personalized way. So I used the example of rent deposit and first month's rent. It really could be anything at all under the sun that the client tells us, this is how I want to get out of homelessness. And we respect that. We build the plan with them to help them get out of homelessness. So that's sort of the demand and supply side of donations. And in terms of our revenue model, what we do is we have contracts with local government or other commissioning bodies to essentially cover the operating costs of our work there. And that really comes over to the very brief offer summary, and you'll see the same thing on a pitch deck on Ethex's website. But the idea is that based off of those contracts, we believe that we can generate a healthy revenue and create a moderate and sustainable return for people who are supporting our growth. So coming back to this slide is really just to say that, our goal, big aim is to, by 2031, have empowered over 30,000 people to leave homelessness behind for good. And we need your help to get there. So that's where we are today. I'm not going to hog too much airtime here. I think Josh, probably much better for us to have a chat and get some questions in. But just wanted to give a brief overview of what Greater Change does, what our mission is, what our vision for the future is. So thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, John. I'm just conscious there's a little bit of a debate going on in the chat at the moment, which isn't particularly relevant to this webinar. So we'll just we won't be diving into that at the moment.
Yeah.
John, I think one of the things that actually just, are you able to just stop sharing actually on the?
Yes, I can.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and then this goes. Yeah, so one of the things I think that came to me then is, how does an individual sign up to Greater Change? Actually, to say I want to donate. Yeah, I like what you do. Sounds like a great idea. How do I get involved?
So if as a donor, all you need to do is go on our web platform, and that's where you will be able to find stories of people that we're currently supporting, and you'll be able to help any one of them or all of them, really, if you choose a split donation option, to help them take steps out of homelessness. And I think as a individual, as someone who is experiencing homelessness, the way our clients get referred to us is via our partner charities. So as I was alluding to earlier, for example, Aspire Oxford is one of our main partner charities in the UK at the moment, and we were sort of very lucky to have it incubated by them from the start. So what would happen is, a caseworker, say Barry at Aspire, would fill in a very short 10 to 15 minutes, online application form to refer one of his clients, Natalie, to us. And we would review that application, we'll pick up the phone, we'll talk to Barry, and we sort of really figure out Natalie's needs and what sort of catalyst funding she needs in order to take that next step to move on. So it's all via partners that we trust. And it was a very deliberate decision to say that we're not going to just run our own in-house support work team. Firstly, because we don't think that's a very cost-effective way to work. But secondly, it adds a huge burden to the clients' lives. If you imagine this yet another stranger you have to talk to, that you have to develop a relationship of trust with, it's much better to work with someone where that trust already exists. And I think thirdly, it's just really to say that there's a lot of really great professional expertise out there. There's no need for us to go in there and get involved with that side of things. We're just really, really focused on, as I was saying, bridging that gap that we saw before. Yeah.
And as the beneficiary, to what extent are they also involved in that conversation, or developing that plan around how the donation should be used?
Yeah, so I mean, as I was saying, I think what's really, really important to us is that they get a say, and that we respect their aspirations and their goals. And that's important for a number of reasons, but mostly because we think that they know best, right? People on the ground know best. If you think about, say, maybe even a bank doing a KYC check, there's no better KYC check here than the support worker on the front line and the person that we're trying to support. So they tell us how they want to get out of homelessness, what their aspirations are. So, do you want to be a nurse? Do you want to, get your forklift license? Do you want to become a gym personal trainer because that's what you were really into before you experienced homelessness? You tell us how you want to get out of homelessness, and we simply, provide the support to build a financial plan around that. So they're very heavily involved, involved. Yeah.
And I think probably this leads to the next thing, because one of the some of the stats you're highlighting there, you've got a really high success rate. The recidivism, the success rate was amazing, but also just keeping people off the street once they engage with the program. Why do you think that might be? What do you think is the key driver for that?
So I think it's really closely linked to the fact that we respect people's choices. It's because of how flexible we are around what we choose to fund. It really is exactly providing them what they need, and it turns out more often than not, with a sound support, with a sound caseworker, a really good wraparound support, and the provision of the financial catalyst from us, that actually, it turns out that works quite well, because we trust what they do. They're that much more bought into the plan because it's their plan. They're not being dictated to. So they work a lot harder for it. And I think also it's just much more appropriate, right? Because I think it's actually quite difficult in the UK to find fully flexible funding. So often you'll get funding for one or two things, but they'll have a lot of restrictions on top of that. You can only spend £300. There will be and we're going to release it in 2 tranches over 6 months, and it can only be used on XYZ, right? What we don't have is any of these rules. a lot of it is just entirely based on the relationship of trust that we have between us and our partners. I think that really just makes all the difference in the world, because they know what they're doing, and we're providing them a significant amount of funding to help them make that step change. So yeah, I think it really comes back down to what we mentioned in a previous question. Really, is that it's just that trust and that that allowing people to take control of their lives. That's I think the really important aspect.
Yeah, great, absolutely. And I think also, talking about your partnerships, I think those having those good partnerships is really crucial as well. And I noticed, because your model is to operate in different council areas, for example, I think you off Oxford, some of the London boroughs, and I guess it's finding the right partners on the ground as well. Now, I'm familiar with Aspire here in Oxford, a fantastic organisation. How do you go about finding the right partners?
Well, so they get introduced to us. I think it's quite an interesting question. I think so far, I think it's been quite organic in how we form new partnerships. We're very lucky to, again, based off of the credibility of our impacting work, we share a lot of the evidencing that we have very openly, and then we, organically build a lot of relationships with partners, and then there's no real sort of, how should I put this? There's no sort of, again, any hard criteria that says we refuse to work with, this organization, that organization. It's all about, if we have that conversation with you, do we think that this is the type of support that you can give to your clients, that when we complement and support that, that's going to enable and empower them to make that step change. So I guess maybe that was a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but really I think it's just so organic at the moment because we're such a young organization. I think brilliant that we have the attendees here and the people watching live. This is also partially how that happens, right? We get people just messaging us saying, hey, there's this great organization that I volunteer with. Can I make the introduction? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's very, very sort of organic, sort of grassroots kind of growth at the moment.
Yeah, great. So I think that's a good point, actually. So you are open, if people do work with an organisation that's engaging with homeless people, for them to get in touch with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so we've had a question come in from Mary. So what's the average amount of financial support given to an individual homeless person through Greater Change?
Yeah, so the average amount is hovering at just over £1,000 at the moment. The actual variance is pretty large, as you can imagine, because sometimes, what people might need is basic ID and documentation, because if you've been rough sleeping for a long time, you might have lost your passport, etc. So getting, a PDL as a stand-in ID or getting a passport, that costs a couple of £100, maybe about £190 to £200 at the moment. On some other bigger amounts will come from the fact that some people need help again with rent deposits. That's usually over £1,000. Some people need support with rent arrears. And for us, we greatly believe that prevention is much better than cure. So, what usually happens with rent arrears cases is that, these are the people who have fallen through the cracks. And in theory, the support network that we have as a country shouldn't allow that. But obviously, we know the fact is that on the ground that there are many who fall through the cracks. So what will happen is, say they've accumulated £5,000 in rent arrears. What we would do is we try to support them to pay down, say, £2,000 up front, and then create a payment plan for them to pay off the remaining £3,000. And again, that's just so much more effective than letting someone become homeless or an entire family becoming homeless and going through the pathway, which is just incredibly traumatic and painful, obviously, for the individual, but really is no good at all for the public purse, if you want to think about it that way as well, because it's just so much more expensive to get someone out later. So a variety of needs that we've seen, certainly with the eviction ban coming to an end, we definitely had quite an uptick in the number of cases there, people losing their jobs, etc. But yeah, the average is hovering around, 1,000 to 1,100 at the moment. As I say, the variance can be quite large because of how we sort of pride ourselves on being quite flexible about what we support.
Yeah, actually, that's really a really interesting point you've made there about prevention? Because I think, you know, whenever you talk about these kind of social issues, prevention is always that much more cheaper and cost efficient, but also much better for everyone involved if you can get that in. And I guess when I thought about greater change, I thought about you getting involved at the point at which someone is homeless. But to hear that you're also getting involved at the point at which someone is at risk of homelessness, that makes total sense for you to do that, because that's where the intervention can probably have the most impact.
Right. I think these are exactly. And, you know, I think oftentimes, sadly, it's people who have reached out and have been triaged appropriately. And again, you know, there are definitely still more people who never reach out at the right time. But, you know, again, this is where our partners are so important, because they come in, they are the people who are sussing it out, sorting out where, you know, families that might need help are, and then approaching them before things get too bad. You know, so yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I guess, I mean, something that we've all been very conscious of is the impact of COVID and the lockdowns. And, you know, there was the initial point at which nobody was to be left on the street, but then I guess there are broader impacts of COVID as well. So how has COVID impacted and maybe shaped greater change?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously been quite a huge problem for everyone to try to sort out. I think, you know, I'm struggling thinking, you know, what can I say about COVID at this point that isn't just a cliche? But so I think we've been quite lucky that COVID, over the period of COVID, we were able to greatly ramp up our support work. So actually, in last year, we supported, you know, over 130 people out of homelessness. This year, it's looking like we're going to support over 220, 230 people out of homelessness. That sort of growth is really encouraging for us, you know, as an organization that's quite young, started in, you know, 2018, supporting the first batch of people in 2018. You know, the growth in numbers is very encouraging for us in the team. So being able to do that has been a huge privilege. I think there was a bit of a silver lining at the start of COVID, because I'm sure many here will have heard about the Everyone In program that the government had implemented at the start. And what that meant was we had hotel accommodation and other kinds of hostels, B&Bs, etc., you know, really booked out to try to move rough sleepers into those hotels. And you know, there are flaws in that system, obviously, but what we did have was a very small window of opportunity to try to help people sort of take larger steps out of homelessness that way. Because, you know, who knew, right? If you have a solid roof over your head and a nice bed, and you sleep better, your mental health improves. You know, and it's just very intuitive. That I think there was a small period of time when we could have done that, and we did do a lot of work then. We're quite proud of that. But obviously, you know, that funding has come to an end. So you will have noticed, even back in December last year, you know, people starting to move back out onto the streets again. And we really went back into sort of full-blown levels of rough sleeping back in May or June. So, you know, loads more work to be done, but we're quite lucky to be able to say that, you know, over COVID, we were able to grow quite a bit. And which is why, you know, we're now looking forward to accelerating further, you know, reaching out further to more people across more geographies.
Okay, thanks, John. I think it might be useful just to, if you don't mind, just talking a little bit about the Greater Change business model.
Yeah.
And how does your, you know, how are you able to generate revenues as a business to you know, to be able to deliver your impact and to run, but also, you know, you are currently carrying out a raise on the Ethex platform, and so how also do you see that those revenues will then be able to feed into some sort of investor return as well?
Absolutely. So, you know, I think as I sort of very briefly skimmed through earlier in terms of our revenue model. So what we do is we are commissioned by local authorities or other bodies to essentially cover the cost of our operational work in each area. You know, we believe that at scale, we can make a decent margin on that to essentially repay people who are currently supporting the growth of our work. I think that's really, really important because, you know, it's a capital base that we otherwise wouldn't be able to access in order to grow. So I think it's really important to acknowledge also that, obviously sometimes there's an inherent awkwardness or hesitation around the introduction of things like shares and dividend yields around what is seen as a non-profit organization. We certainly are. We have an asset lock in our articles, etc. But to sort of address that really upfront, and the point is that in many ways, for an organization like us, equity is just so much better and so much more flexible than a debt instrument, right?
Yeah.
Because with a debt instrument, within a couple of years, your headroom will have evaporated. Whereas with equity, so in many ways, I would say, for a charity, for a non-profit, equity is actually a much better instrument, right? It's much more powerful an instrument for the growth of a small organization like ours. And because we're so locked in, our model's so tied in lockstep with our impact. So the contracts that we have with local authorities will essentially say, if you pay us 25,000, 30,000 pounds a year, which is not huge sums of money, 25,000, 30,000 pounds a year to operate in your area will guarantee that will help at least 50 to 60 people out of homelessness, right? And what that means is that takes away a bit of the risk from the local authority. It also means that our revenue will always be tied closely in lockstep with the impact outcomes that we're seeking to achieve. So that's basically how we work. As I was covering earlier, we have a huge amount of cost savings impact to various local departments. And that includes local police forces, local authorities, community foundations who might have an interest in this sort of work, probation services, local CCGs, ICSs, as they're about to come into power next year. Those are all sort of potential organizations that we could be working with. We have a couple of existing contracts with local authorities. In the long run, we're looking to really diversify our various revenue streams to all these different players as well who do benefit from our work. So that's kind of how we see ourselves growing, how we want to cover our operating costs, and then how we then generate a revenue that can then provide, I think, a sustainable and fair return to investors who are essentially supporting the acceleration of our work via the release of dividends or otherwise. More details I think can be found again on the Ethex platform, but that's sort of a brief overview of the revenue model.
Yeah, and I think it's really important the point you raised about equity, and actually, and I think it's probably useful for people to understand a little bit how equity works in relation to a kick, and in particular your kick. So for a start, no more than 35% of your is it revenues, is it, or profits?
Distributable profits.
Yeah, distributable profits. So no more than 35% can be distributed as dividends. That means everything else goes back into the organization to support its impact. And also in terms of the shares themselves, they can't be bought back by the management at anything above the original value for which was paid for them as well, which is a nice way of preventing people trying to generate returns from capital appreciation and then a management buyout. So there are some kind of structures in place in that type of equity to prevent it being done in such a way that it's detracting from the impact of the organization. It's about enabling a fair return, I think, to be delivered, but not an excessive return.
That's right. I think, and it's sort of a really nice balancing act that has been drawn out, right? I think CICs, did they come into existence in 2010? Was it the Companies Act around that time that brought them into existence? But really, they've only really started to come into the fore nowadays. So I think we're really on the forefront of that to say, this is an interesting way to fund growth for a high impact startup. So yeah, I think it's a really great structure and is something we really appreciate the opportunity from Ethex to be able to put that proof in. Yeah.
So as you say, there is more detail on that on the returns model within the offer documents. I would encourage people to go and take a look at that. You are also available for is it social investment tax relief or enterprise investment?
It's EIS, so enterprise investment.
Yes,
yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's worth bearing in mind. I guess just talking to you then, and I'm just thinking about platforms, and I think sometimes, there's how does age interplay with platforms, and I'm just wondering, in terms of both your donors actually and your recipients, are there specific age groups that tends to cluster into, or is it more broad than that?
Yeah, so surprisingly not. Right. I think people might expect that perhaps this appeals more to a younger, more tech savvy crowd, but I don't think that's true. I think that's a huge credit to our team. I'm very proud of the work that we've done to say that is a friendly, intuitive interface that obviously can always be improved on, but at the same time, means that it's accessible to people from all demographics, really. I think the classic one, obviously, Josh, as you probably know, is that in charities, women give more than men. But that's a sort of classic thing that underruns through, I think, all charities, really. Just superior. Other than that, actually quite an even sort of demographic base. So we're very happy with that, actually.
Yeah. And then in terms of the the kind of regions you're working in, and the type of councils that you're working with, I mean, I think again you make a kind of distinction here between what you say is more urban and then more rural, and it seems that where is the main area you work would be urban. Is it possible that there are rural areas that you can also push out into too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for example, I think under ONS classifications, Chichester, where we do work, is considered a rural, a town, but it's mostly rural. We obviously, there is a problem to solve there, and anyone who is from Chichester or has been down to Chichester, there are rough sleeping issues there, in spite of it being quite a wealthy town, right? So yeah, I think there is definitely a lot of opportunity for us to work in all sorts of areas. I think in the estimates that we provided in the share pitch document on Ethex's website, I think we try to be conservative where we can, just to make that make that case more clearly that even in spite of conservative assumptions, there are some pretty large potentials for growth. Another example is that you wouldn't consider Oxford to be a major conurbation, but actually the size of our work there is pretty large, and we think that we can continue to grow the size of the work there as well, because it's a big problem in Oxford. In my time there, when I was studying between even 2014 and 2017, it's palpable, right? Even across those 3 years, you could see this huge increase, and the statistics bear that out as well. I think there is a lot of opportunity to work in some more rural areas as well. In the market sizing bit of our share offer doc, and certainly in most areas, I think the size of the work can be even larger than we've estimated it to be. But that's sort of the really exciting part. Yeah.
I know you're absolutely right about Oxford. Someone who's lived here for a good part of my life, it's always been a very visible issue, and it's quite jarring when you look at the rest of the way Oxford is and the way it presents itself, that you just have this inequality and very sort of poverty as well. And I guess just thinking about that, it feels like where we are at the moment, that the problem may well be getting worse before it gets better, as we come out of the various furlough schemes and we come out of the COVID situation, and also just a kind of crisis around cost of living. And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. What government levers do you think should be being pulled at the moment in order to try and tackle this problem and head it off, prevent it?
Where you're gonna ignite the economist in me, and I'll get really deep into that. I think the truth is the government could try to replicate what we do. And that's a large part of what we are trying to do as well, is actually, with the impact and the evidencing, is to try to produce the kind of evidence base that might be convincing to policymakers, right? Look, I think it's no big surprise that people in social care sector will always tell you that they're underfunded, and to be honest, it's kind of true, right? The reality is that in homelessness, for example, the funding comes in on an annual basis. So we know that we have a lot of partners and ourselves as well. Where if, for example, we're in a stage of growth, so we're almost quite lucky to be on a small side at the moment and slowly growing into a larger role. But you have some charities that are dependent on £1 million government contract from one local authority to operate, right? And they get their funding, approved on an annual basis, and that's a pretty precarious situation to be in, because if there are funding cuts next year, you basically end up firing people. And it's actually so difficult as well to hire talented people in the first place on such a sort of flimsy funding basis. So, if I had one wish, is obviously to increase the amount of funding that the sector sees. It's a solvable problem. Very often it can seem so intractable, homelessness, but the truth is that there are actually good plans to help us get out of it. And, we just need to put the right amount of resource behind it. But, I think other than that is also just to look at new best practices, like from organizations like us. That's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're testing a new best practice. So if you look at it almost from a startup perspective of what we're doing, which is, learn fast, right? Fail fast, learn fast. What we are doing is providing a really, really good, hopefully, trial into this new way of supporting people. And so far, thankfully, it's been quite successful. So we are very happy with what we've been able to do there. Obviously, would be great to get more government support for that. I think the last thing, if I could say, is just there's a lot of buzzwords around partnerships and collaboration and multi-agency work. I think certainly the trend in the future is moving towards a direction, and that's again partially why we're so optimistic about our future, because we really benefit from multi-agency work and multi-agency funding because of how our work impacts so many different departments. But really, if we could start to put real, at the end of the day, it's all about budgets, right? If you really put the budget on the line around multi-agency collaboration, you're going to overnight see it's transform from being just a buzzword into something that every single local authority is doing, right? Because if the funding structure is there to incentivize that, people are going to follow that. So yeah, won't go into more detail and bore everyone here, but
no, it's not boring at all. I mean, I think it's fascinating, and I think it demonstrates why it's so important to have organisations like Greater Change operating, because you are small and because you are young and quite fleet-footed, you can innovate, and you can demonstrate, you can try out new things, you can demonstrate effectiveness. I think it's a really important point you're saying about building an evidence base.
Yeah.
Building this evidence base that actually, interventions, financial interventions at this point in time with people at risk of homelessness work. And then you can actually then take that to government, and you can take that to policymakers and say, look, here's a model. Can you replicate that and roll it out? And so hopefully, that Greater Change is really part of that, becomes part of that solution to the problem.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, fingers crossed. And you're absolutely right. It's this whole idea that, in the early days of Greater Change, before we were even incorporated, Alex and I had to sometimes go months at a time without pay. In fact, I was, dedicating my weekends and evenings. I was working a full-time job in a consultancy before working full-time at Greater Change. And we're not delusional about it. We know that that's a privilege to be able to not take a salary for a couple of months and sort of bootstrap along the way. That's a privilege, and we're happy to have been able to do that. But it's not sustainable, right? And no, it's not sustainable for any organization. So and certainly no one's out. We shouldn't expect people to be out here to martyr themselves. And I think it's certainly we need more and more support. We need continuing support to continue to grow. But I think the future's bright. Like we're going to move in that direction. The buzzwords will transform into action. It already has in a lot of areas, and more. So I think we're going to look at the evidence. We're going to look at the data. We're going to say what works and what doesn't, based off of that. and also trusting, you know, people on the front lines, you know. So I think things are moving in a direction, and we're just doing whatever we can to help move it there. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a really positive point to kind of finish on there, John. I'm conscious of time. I've really enjoyed it. There's been a great conversation today, and hopefully it's been informative to people online as well. If anyone does have any follow-up questions, please feel free to push them through, and we can pick those up and get responses back to you. So yes, as I'd say, you know, Greater Change are raising finance on the Ethex platform at the moment. Please come and take a look and read the offer document and find out a bit more about the organisation. So just finish up, you know, to say thank you so much, John, for your time today. It's been a really good conversation, I think. Thank you to everyone else who's logged on and taken part and watched the webinar. Yeah, and with that, I'd just like to say have a good rest of the day and take care.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, everyone. And my contact details as well are in the pitch deck on Ethex. So if you have any other follow-up questions, you know, feel free to just reach out via that email address, and you know, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Yeah.
That's great.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, John. Cheers, everyone. Take care.
Bye.